Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tipping Point and the FinTech Minute Stake. Today, with me is a very special friend, somebody whom I studied with over 20 years ago. Don't start calculating our age now, but one of the very bright people that I have had the opportunity to study with, and he's been doing tremendous work in the entrepreneurship space in India. Mr. Sachidananda BS, if I got that right,
Yeah,
Sachi?
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sachinanda is right now assistant professor at Indian Institute of Management Indore, having recently completed his PGP at IIM
PhD.
Bangalore and PhD in entrepreneurship there, right? Not so he's the doctor of startups. That's what we're going to call him, Doctor Startup. And before that, he's also a computer science engineer from NITK and has spent over 12 years in entrepreneurship. So welcome, Sachi. Thanks for taking out time, Doc.
Thanks, Musheer. It's lovely to see you after such a long time, and thanks for giving this opportunity. I think we can get started.
Yeah, cool. Look, what got us conversing was Sachi recently, his work at IMB around entrepreneurship was published as a result of short articles, a very strong set of notes and insights. And that's what got us started talking because I wanted to get him to share this with the broader audience. So, as you can see, the doctor likes to get to business very quickly. So we're gonna dive right straight in. So Sachin, look, you've had this experience of 12 years. You've looked at it from having been an entrepreneur yourself, and then you've done the thesis. You've done the PhD in one of the top institutes in India, and you've experienced a lot. So in your experience in the last 10 years, which has reshaped the Indian business world, as it were, with significant growth in the number of startups. Now we're the third largest startup ecosystem in the world and fast growing. What do you see, or what have you seen evolve in the Indian entrepreneur, as it were? Right? What has changed? Entrepreneurs or startup ecosystem, what do you think has evolved for it to become more stronger in the recent times?
I think, as you just pointed out, there are three dimensions that we can look at it. One is the entrepreneurs itself. The second is in terms of the ecosystem's evolution, and in the third, I think it's more the cultural menu. I would say when I say cultural milieu, I mean that the acceptance of entrepreneurship or as a career for a lot of people, right? So if you would have been wondering around 20 years back when the IT .com stuff was going on, if somebody would have said, if we are to start up, the parents would be rushing down and saying, oh, I think you have a better career. Why are you doing this? Something
Yeah,
that's
highly
like saying,
Infosys and Wipro, right? I got that from my parents when I started off, but yeah.
yeah, right. So you have a stable job that you can do. Why do you want to get into entrepreneurship?
Yeah.
I see a much younger crowd that's entering into the entrepreneurial thing. The other element which I see is in terms of people, by virtue of starting up much earlier, they have this cushion, if you want to call it, whether parents are still going to support them for a few more years, and these people could actually experiment a bit more freely. So that's some of the benefits of starting early for these people, right? If you think about in the ecosystem, I think the way we have grown towards a slightly more technologically encompassing ideas. When I say technologically, I primarily am talking about IT and stuff has increased from some of the earlier ones that you would have seen. I mean, we both grew up in Bangalore at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And we would have seen a lot of services companies to changing the whole thing and saying, okay, we can actually do something more locally, be the examples of the Flipkarts or whatever, to saying we can actually think about technologies we can take globally as well, especially in the SaaS kind of a space that's going on. The experience that I'm talking about is primarily going to be driven by the Bangalore's ecosystem, which is obviously the fastest growing in India in entrepreneurship sense. But I don't think so. This is very different even in some of the other areas. But definitely, there is a dearth of infrastructure, if we say, in terms of some high tech industries to take off. So that continues to remain a challenge for us. If you take about silicon-based industries or any of that chip design and all that, we find there are few fabrication facilities itself for ICs, right? Almost none existing.
Yeah.
So if you're saying you're going to become the hardware capital of the future, in some ways challenging China's approach, we don't find that we really are ready for it. We have a very strong, IT base, but it has to be cusped with or mixed with a lot of hardware experience. That's a big shortcoming that we have at this moment in the ecosystem. And even if you take other industries, be it biotech or whatever, we still find ourselves lacking a great deal in the way we could potentially take off, given our potential versus where we are. So in summary, while we have seen a lot of infrastructure improvement, the acceptance of entrepreneurship, deep tech entrepreneurship still is far away from where I would have liked it to be. So that's what I would say on this question. Yeah.
What about, we touched on a very good point, which is probably universal in Asia and it's changing, which where your parents, when you're growing up, want you to be an engineer, which we both ended up being, or a doctor or a lawyer, right? In our case, everybody was an engineer when we were passing out with 30,000 engineers coming out of Bangalore itself every year. But that risk appetite is what you were mentioning about. And one is they start early, so they have that kind of cushion where the parents can support them, the proverbial couch in the house in the American sense of the way. But how have you seen the way they think about businesses change, right? For example, one of the things, Flipkart is a very classic example. Flipkart is something that was built based on an American model. It was Amazon's replica in India, built by ex-Amazonians, as it were. Right? And now it's evolved into much more, but at the start, it was like a replica of what Amazon is. But how have you seen that? So that mentality, I think, is now we're seeing more tailor-made, more custom-made products. But entrepreneurs themselves, how do you see their thinking? Are they looking at the jugaad options? Are they looking at more mature options? What do you see them doing? Are they still looking to bring international ideas here rather than their own ideas? How are you seeing that grow?
I think there's actually a spectrum of ideas or entrepreneurs themselves who are spread up here. What we see in high tech is going to be, at least there was a phase where you could simply take an American idea saying, okay, there's a large market here, we could build it up, and potentially there is a US company which wants to enter, and we become interesting acquisition targets for these people. But I think with the understanding of how entrepreneurship could be done, people seem to be experimenting a lot more in it. However, so if I could just take a slightly academic detour here, when I say experimenting based, I essentially mean, let's say, the lean startup kind of movement that's kind of gotten a lot of people to say, okay, I'll experiment, figure it out. What is that works? Which is kind of throwing up a new opportunities in the local system. But if you think about a lot of the other way in which Silicon Valley, for example, grew, it's essentially the network that these companies have with each other, because the founders pretty much know another founder kind of a thing. In the Indian context, we still find that a shortcoming in terms of the networks and connections.
Despite the IIT network, despite the IIM network, the joke was, if you're from an IIT and you stand outside on the road with a banner saying, I have an idea, the car will stop and you get 50 lakh rupees, at that time about 100,000 US. It doubles up for you in that sense.
We are assuming, it's again the network, like you're pointing out, for an elite group, but it's not really restricted to that group, right? Entrepreneurship. And some of these IITians or even the high network people, if you want to call it that way, because their buddy essentially is in the VC part of the world also, so it's easier for them to get the money. But execution is where a lot of things it really tests whether you're going to take off or not, right? So the proliferation has kind of helped innovate and get that Indian flavor in the ideas much more higher, I would say. But when I say about partnerships, in terms of saying, let's say I'm toying around and there is a person, I'm just talking about it, and then that taking off. So, so that kind of a system still is something that is very essential for us to get technologies, experiments which are almost like at a lab or very experimental stages. Getting them into a larger organization, for example, will be a huge boost for the kind of startups which would come up. So, for example, if you are looking at Israel, you have this period when people go and finish their work, come back to the army for a very short time, and that's a nice mixture where you have ideas and you have technologies, and then new ideas and technologies meet for you to think about the new ventures coming up. So that kind of a networking that you're really talking about is not yet taken a very strong hold in India, if you want to say. I mean, one of the reasons why I think Bangalore also grew is its culture of pubs, right? I mean, a nice way where people could just sit down, talk about whatever their ideas are, and then, okay, I think I can take this part of what you're doing, or I can give you this contract, and things going. I think social spaces that way in the Bangalore's world are really the pubs or clubs.
About the pubs.
So pubs are kind of interesting social spaces where people would hang out. You're meeting friends and saying, okay, I have this idea. Why don't I give you a contract? You give me a contract to do something up. So these are new opportunities that would take off, right? So this would work in a very classical, system for Bangalore when it was small. But when you're doing it in a much more entrepreneurial setting, we need more ways in which we can just interact and do. Some initiatives kind of help. Some of the boot camps, for example, have played a role. But does it finalize into these new technological ideas really translating into business or getting accepted into business? That kind of thing is still something.
Here's this question, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times, and this is from my personal experience as building something in the last year or so, entrepreneurship can quite often be this lonely journey, as quite a few, especially in the early days, if you're a sole founder. Right. And a lot of people talk about finding a co-founder or finding that support ecosystem. Right. What you're talking about is the collaborative element of finding others who can come in. But in many cases, these entrepreneurs want to do things on their own, right? So from that perspective, what have you seen that how do you find that approach? How there's a smile on your face which says, I recognize this and I know what this is going to go into. So how do you see that, this lone founder philosophy of I want to be the next Tesla, versus the people who want to be more collaborative and work with a broader ecosystem?
The point that you're seeing seems to be multi-layered, okay? And I'll beat it up I'll chisel it out from each different dimension first. Yeah. So the question is sole entrepreneur the reality, or is it an abnormal thing, right? I mean, I think it's not the routine.
Is it a poison chalice, or is it this ideal unicorn, literally the unicorn, which we are all wanting to become?
I mean, if you really ask yourself, most ventures are not single founder based at all, right? It's only that you kind of make one person the face of the venture and then you try to anchor it around it. But the team is what is still an essential component of it. Okay, so that's one point which I would make first. The next point is in terms of saying how many times does a entrepreneur get his first idea right? In the sense that is the idea I began. It was all having elements and I'll get going with everything. So he may have underestimated some resource. He may have overestimated something happening for himself. I mean, these things are the reality of what would really kind of happen in the entrepreneurial setting, right? In this sense, it's very surprising that people still believe that the idea is the most crucial element of what entrepreneurship is. It is definitely a very useful element to start, but that is not the one which you'll end up with. So even if you've heard Mark Zuckerberg's speech at Harvard, you will realize that he'll keep saying that ideas are never coming out fully formed. You need to continue to work to see where it is going, right? And this idea has a starting point, but how large will it grow is essentially a collaborative exercise itself, right?
Okay.
And the stories of some people believing some ideas will get stolen. I think it's like saying if your ideas are simply so easy to get stolen, I think so many people would have gotten the idea anyway, right?
Yeah.
And the most likely situation where an idea gets stolen is when you have everything complementary already existing in the ecosystem, right? Then it's like that was the last straw that had to be put, and then the whole thing falls down. Then that's what we are talking about, right?
Yeah.
So in the Indian ecosystem, it's not just that so many pieces are missing in the whole ecosystem, right? Even if you take, for example, the EV industry, the first EV vehicle, I mean, electric vehicle itself is over a decade, I mean, over a century and 10 years before that, right? So so it's pretty old. And why did it take so long to get in? It is essentially the ecosystem that was playing with its own bottlenecks to really manifest these ideas into a viable venture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in your book or the booklet, as it were, and I hope it becomes a book soon, you do talk about how the journey, the venture and the venture builder, it becomes their personal life and the venture life become morphed into one and indistinguishable, as the term you use, right?
Yeah.
And but so in that case, when there's that so much emotional attachment, sometimes it's how do founders deal with it, or what's the best approach for them to deal with it?
I think there is a kind of maturity that we need to have. I mean, the way we have to think about the idea that we are working on is more like a kid, right?
Sure.
We are getting a kid to grow up, right?
Yeah.
At some point, the kid has to make their own life further, right? So we are doing the decisions in the best interest of the kid. It's not my kid, but it's like saying I'm enabling the kid to live on its own, right? So that kind of mindset, when you have, it's easier to distinguish or handle this emotional elements and saying, okay, it's not my ownership. I may own equity in it, but I think it has a life of its own. And what it needs is getting those skills which are necessary. So if it means me as a founder stepping down and putting somebody else who's more experienced, for example, to run the whole venture, that is the best thing for the kid to be done, then that's what has to be done, right? That's the kind of thinking that has to come in. And like you pointed out, it's difficult when you are doing it the first time, because we believe the idea is ours and we are the idea. But as you begin asking yourself, what does this mean to me over a period of time, you realize that that distinction is essential. Because we may lose interest in the venture at some point because it's growing slowly, but for somebody else it may be that they are much more equipped to take it further, and the venture requires it to move its own journey, right? So the analogy that I would think about is, what should we as parents do for the kid? So that's the way I see this dichotomy as being solved.
It is that's what people call, this is my baby, is grown up, this is my little baby that I'm growing, and this is what's happening, right? And then you share with somebody at times, and then you try to change. What for you, besides what we've spoken about, are key I don't know, I mean, pitfalls, key crevices, or chasms that entrepreneurs need to be aware of, that they may be walking into? What are the blind spots? Let me use that term. Maybe what's the blind spot?
I think the first blind spot comes from us understanding that most of ideas are unseen, right? It's an imagination that carries so many of our biases, right, into it when we are writing down, for example, the first two statements about our idea, right? Because we don't see our idea, we are married to it before we even realize it, right? So that's in my opinion the first fundamental mistake that we make in terms of, if you can say, objectifying an idea. Maybe that's the word to use it. from a very extremely subjective and idiosyncratic explanation of it to how we really get to understand our idea in a more objective sense, right? And saying, okay, who would need it, right? Playing the devil's advocate at the other side of it. So this is one of the first pitfalls that we fall into. And I think the source, as I pointed out, is because its genesis is in our own thinking. Its genesis is in our imagination, right? So the second one, I think, is in terms of expecting, what do you say, every aspect of the idea to be thought through. So most of them just gestate over the idea and not get into action. So without action, this objectification process doesn't begin at all. So you need to not keep sitting on the idea for like perpetuity. You kind of have to get to action. There is no way you can start your journey with getting all the signals green when you're leaving home, right? You got to have the confidence of saying, I'm sitting on the scooter and I can actually park when I want to or stop when I want to. So that's the kind of saying we need a bit more ownership in terms of saying, okay, it's even if it's not completely predictable, it's okay, we'll make the move. So a lot of people spend too much time just in this initial phase playing around and pivoting mentally, if you want to call it that way, without any action. So that's the second point. So first was an idea, which is completely imagination. Second is about action. The third is in terms of saying, I need to, I mean, I don't know where the possible market really is for a lot of things which get into deep tech, right? For something that is not so deep tech, which is more agile, you have the lean kind of thinking process that happens. So then you begin saying, how do I really partner, right? If I want to partner with people. And when you're doing that, I think we need to think about it in a very staged manner, right? So that kind of a thinking, I think the analogy may be interesting if you take up some of the commentators' statement in cricket, right? They'll say, okay, this guy has actually spent a lot of time on the crease. He's seeing the ball like a football, right? And what you mean by that is you're able to instantiate the whole thing so slowly and clearly that it's hard to miss what could go wrong, right? It's not about being prepared mentally. It's about saying, okay, what can I anticipate and how do I actually write it up as a contract if I want to? This is the kind of problem that they get into partnerships. When you're really thinking about taking stuff along with the partnership route, right?
Okay. Now,
I think these three. Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you had to pick three main characteristics that make a successful entrepreneur, right? And say these would be the three main things that make somebody a successful entrepreneur in terms of achieving what they achieve. I mean, you can define what success is for an entrepreneur as well. What would that be?
Okay, I would resist from taking a stance on success or failure. Okay. Because it's not the entrepreneur who fails, right? It's the venture that fails, if it all fails, right? So this distinction between
interesting because a lot of times there's also the question about, there will be mistakes that the entrepreneur may make, in hiring, in what they'll decide to do with the company, how they treat with it, all of that.
Yeah. So this goes back to the dichotomy that we were talking about in terms of the venture and the individual earlier, right? Yeah. So what shuts down, what goes bankrupt essentially is the venture. That's a mistake. Okay. That's a mistake on the entrepreneur's front. But what bears the brunt of such mistakes is essentially the venture. So the venture essentially collapses. It's a failure in that sense. Right? I mean, like you said, over a series of decisions, you have many which can go wrong, right? And this is where I was pointing out to the partnership story much higher. What I'm talking about partnership there is getting that network of people who can actually guide you on dimensions which you have not well versed with. It's just maybe pick up the phone, call a guy and say, I'm making this kind of a decision. What what is it that you would advise me, for example, to do it? Not a friend, but let's say an entrepreneur who's gone and experienced similar decisions, right? Or even in terms of saying, okay, there's a deal which is coming for me to sell off this company. What do I do? Right? These are decisions that may be very what do you say, the first time for you, but for somebody else, this is already a decision they have done. At least being prepared on those fronts makes it very useful. So the entrepreneur is a collection of experiences that way, right?
Okay.
So the venture is what bears the brunt of whatever these decisions outcomes are. But for the entrepreneur, it's lived experience, which is kind of part of him, and that part of him could guide him into making another decision subsequently. Okay, now coming to the first part of what you asked, which is saying what are essential characteristics of an entrepreneur. I would say I think I've seen entrepreneurs of all kinds, in the sense that I can't point out and say he has to be an extrovert, he has to be wealthy, right? These characteristics don't hold. So I would say if you're looking for one trait that would define an entrepreneur, the answer is no, you won't find it. But what is essential for entrepreneurship is action, right? Without action, I mean, you may be thinking about an idea for eternity and not acting on it, so you can't become an entrepreneur. You may not have an idea which is like $1 million idea or whatever and still be an entrepreneur. Think about somebody who's just doing subsistence entrepreneurship, right? Mm-hmm. I just know how to make my tea and I'm actually just doing it. So it becomes a self-employment. And let's say you as a Musheer go and say, wow, this tea is very good. Can you begin supplying it to my office? Mm-hmm. And then you have a very different possibility. And Musheer comes up and says, wow, the tea is good. I think I should actually shift from doing this fintech related startup to doing.
I think tea is a much better proposition. Everybody likes it at least.
Yeah. So in terms of seeing that action is where the whole story comes for entrepreneurs. So without action, there is no entrepreneurship that can ever happen. So then we are seeing action is very essential. And the question that has to be is how do we act, right? Yeah. So that's where I think the real question has to be. And even as people who practice, even as people who are academicians, I think that's where most of the focus is now in terms of entrepreneurship. So be it, let us say, the lean or a lot of boot camps which are trying to get people to work on partnerships. Or in effectuation, if you want to call it. So there's so many different ways, but action is becoming more central to what entrepreneurship really is. And the other reality of entrepreneurship, I'm pretty sure everybody understands that, is the uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
The uncertainty is pretty different from risk. Most people confuse risk and uncertainty. And I think the difference is pretty fundamental. If I can take a couple of minutes more to explain this, is it okay, Musheer? Okay, so in a risk kind of a setting, it's like saying by repeated attempts. Let me play this with you. I think Musheer, I think that will make it a bit more clear. Okay,
let's do this.
So I'll give you an opaque jar, and I want you to simply pick up when I say. Okay, and I will tell you what comes out. You just need to say what the next one will be. Okay, so in this opaque jar, you try the first time, and let's say you get a pen. Okay, a pen.
Okay. Pen, okay.
Yeah. The next time you pick it, you get a protractor.
Okay.
Okay. What do you think you will get the third time?
Scale.
Yeah, you see. Now, how did you come out with this answer?
I guess I was thinking about a geometry box, basically, and I was trying to think of content.
So you said there is a distribution, which is like saying it's in the stationary universe. Yeah. And from the stationary universe, I'm more likely to get something out of this. Okay.
Correct.
Now I'll give you another opaque box. Okay.
Okay.
The first time you get, put your hand, you'll possibly pick up a pencil this time. The second time you pick up, you get a snake.
Okay.
Okay. Now, can you tell me what will happen the third time?
I'm just going to be randomly trying to figure out something with the pencil.
Exactly. The point is that in uncertainty, we cannot predict.
Correct.
Right. And that prediction is because we don't know where the distribution really is. We cannot figure out the draw also. So now let's instead ask a more interesting question about it. Okay.
Yeah.
You have a snake. What will you do with the snake?
Give it to BBMP,
Yeah, return the snake, keep it safe from people.
Yeah.
Or maybe you'll sell it to a snake charmer. Or maybe you're an expert in venom extraction. You decide to tame the snake,
First, you need to figure out what snake it is. But yeah, if it's not venomous, I may decide to keep it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or extract venom and sell it to people who are doing medicines. Or you can simply give it to a leather industry and then let them do what they want to do, right? Now, when faced with uncertainty, most of us get stuck with the with the attempt to see what is going to happen next, right? And often when we are doing that, we are trying to play it like we played the first game, right? And that's because we are looking at the world as if it's a risk-based world, right? But in the uncertain world, what you're certain of is what is in your hand only, right?
Yeah,
which is a snake is in your hand.
In an uncertain world, but you may not find those because you
don't try to figure out what is going to come next, but you have a snake, and tell me what you'll do with the snake, right? So the opportunity is with what you have and whom you know, right? And that throws up a complete different set of possibilities that is there. So this is a very different way in which we could deal with the world, right? So you have an effect of your action which is already there, and use this effect to really create new businesses. So this is what you can think of as an effectuation-based story. Okay, so effectuation at its foundation has this. Effectuation is a very powerful way in which we can build new businesses, new markets, all of this. In the first site, if you see, the first one is also trying to tell you a bit about the risk-based world, and that's how lean operates.
Sure.
That's how the lean methodology operates, right?
Yeah.
So this is somewhere we need to understand what is it that we are going to be comfortable with in doing.
Yeah. Look, this is fascinating, right? This shows why you're the doc of entrepreneurship, right? I mean, I think we can go on for long, but I would direct people to look at Sachi's book. Let me show it to the audience. It's called Questions That Get You Thinking. It's questions an entrepreneur should ask in the entrepreneurship journey by Sachidananda, right? So it talks about the what, how, who of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs. And I would highly encourage people to get this from the NSRL cell in IMB, right? So you could download it online, and we'll also have it up on our website in Finstep Asia with Sachidanda's permission to share it.
Right? Sure. Yeah. I have a slightly updated version, which is slightly larger in size. I'll share that with you as well.
I've just reduced the scale to put it into one screen. So
no, it's not that. It's in terms of what I sent you was slightly compressed.
Yeah. So the big version,
larger one. Yeah,
for the details, right? So Sachi, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I think it's
thanks, Musheer. I love talking as well.
And we will get you back for more masterclasses soon. I will share your details with the audience when we post the video.
Sure.
Joining us for the tipping point of entrepreneurship here with FinTech Minute Stake, and we thank the doc of startup.
Thank you. Thank you, Musheer. Thanks a lot. Pleasure meeting you. Yeah, thanks. See you. Take care.